So Rabbi, I had a thought that I wanted to discuss with you guys within the Nes of Chanukah. Because the truth is that the Nes of Chanukah is amongst the more peculiar things that we celebrate. Practically speaking, we mentioned this in other contexts, in other shiurim. Practically speaking, the Nes of the Ner Chanukah was, functionally speaking, unnecessary. It was not necessary, la halacha. Meaning, the story that they tell in the kindergartens, and all of our kids, that the Greeks, they messed up the Beis Hamikdash, and they went to light the menorah when they came back, and they could only find one jug of oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and that's what they lit the menorah. It's true. All of that's very true. But la halacha, unnecessary. And all of the Achronim ask this question. What do we mean, la halacha, it's unnecessary? So we have a principle in halacha, which the Gemara discusses in Psachim and in Yom and in a number of other places, of what's called Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur. Is that if the majority of the community is Tameh, everybody's Tameh, everybody has come in contact with a dead body, and there's not enough time for everybody to become Tahar. In order to become Tahar, what you need is a paratum, is a red heifer, that you have the whole process. First, you have to make sure that you have a red heifer, and that you do the whole ceremony of burning it, taking the ashes, and then even if everything is ready to go, you have the kohen and you're ready to rock and roll, it takes a week, because what you need is for the ashes of the paraduma to be sprinkled on the person that is tameh on the 3rd day of the week and on the 7th day of the week in their week-long tahara process. It takes a week. So in theory, like the Gemara Pesachim describes, in theory, if you would have the whole Jewish people comes back to Yerushalayim, like in the days of the second Beis Hamikdash, and more than 50%, this is the Rambam passages, more than 50% of the Jewish people are tameh. We all bring the Korban Pesach in the state of Tumah. We don't all have to become Tahar. And that is because it is a communal obligation with a defined time. Which one of those two things is the major piece of the sukkah is not for now. But, for example, the Korban Tamid, if everybody would be Tameh, the only way to bring the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice, would be in a state of ritual impurity. You bring it with ritual impurity. Not a question. There's not an opinion in the world that disagrees. Which means, strictly speaking, if the Jewish people showed up to the Beis Hamikdash, they wanted to rededicate the Beis Hamikdash, and they wanted to light the menorah, they did not need pure oil. None of them were pure. The menorah itself wasn't pure, and the oil didn't need to be pure. Which means that the whole miracle thing that happened is, functionally speaking, unnecessary.
Wasn't the miracle also like that they won the war?
That's true.
Yeah, I mean,
that's true. You make a very good point. But, and this is where things get weird, is we don't really make much of a mention.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm trying. We don't.
That's not the big deal.
Correct.
And the Rambam writes, when he discusses the story of Chanukah, speaks about all of the big victories that were won. They were big victories. It was, undoubtedly, it was a big deal. And the Rambam says, and they returned to Jewish sovereignty and monarchy over Eretz Yisrael for another 200 years. Those 200 years were not exactly the greatest 200 years of Jewish sovereignty. Ended with the Romans, which, by the way, we invited. It was not the Romans. The Roman occupation of Judea did not begin with conquest and occupation. It was Jews that couldn't get along with each other.
Yep.
That invited the Romans and said, "Look, we can't handle this. Can you guys help us? Can you step in and give us a hand?" And the Romans said, "Sure." And then they didn't leave for like another 700 years until the collapse of the Roman Empire. But that notwithstanding, the miracle of the oil is the thing that we speak about. Meaning, if you were to ask,
purposely though, because it's a very complicated political history of the Hasmonean dynasty.
Super political, yeah. So the question that you have to ask, and some of the Rishonim Achronim deal with this question, is: did Chanukah shift from the beginning of his observance until like a few hundred years later, at the end of the Second Temple period? I mean, that's an open question. I mean, the observance of Chanukah shift.
When you think contextually about Jewish holidays that come, after the Torah.
Yeah.
So, Purim, right?
Yeah.
Perfect example. Right? We read a Megillah. Why? In part because of the Garrett that Haman sent that.
Yeah.
So, isn't really the idea of lighting the candles, right, which is like this huge question, both scholarly and within Judaic sources,
Right.
What does it mean? It's really just about bringing a mitzvah that's beyond just we won a war, we survived. Meaning that baseline, which is obviously really what we're celebrating at its core, is also endemic throughout all of our holidays, right? Like the joke is actually kind of true,
Right.
They
try to kill us.
They try to just kill us. We eat.
Let's eat. Right.
So we're bringing a mitzvah, which is this ritual observance of the menorah, into our homes essentially with the Chanukah, changing the branches, all the things that we can get into. Like otherwise, there is nothing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Without that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a bunch of other stuff, and it's interesting. Lavush puts that in Shulchan Aruch. That, like, for example, we do have halal every day. That the Chachamim instituted. We don't have halal on Purim,
right? That's
and that the Gemara Megillah discusses
right,
why.
But
there's an obligation of halal. There is no obligation of mishta v'simcha, right? There's no official obligation of making a suda on Chanukah. That doesn't exist. There's a Kriyas HaTorah that you have every day of Chanukah. There's a Kriyas HaTorah. There's Al Hanisa that was instituted, and there's Hadlakas Ner Chanukah, which, by the way, is a bizarre mitzvah for 1,000 reasons. Meaning the halachics of the mitzvah break every rule of the halachics of every other mitzvah. For example, the halacha, what's the best time to light Ner Chanukah? The answer is no one knows. Meaning everybody has an opinion about it, but is it daytime? Is it nighttime? When do you eat matzah? But on the night of Pesach, the whole Haggadah is like Yochanan. Maybe you could say that you're going to tell the story from or from Rishon. No, it has to be when you have the matzah tomorrow in front of you. Yeah, right. You have a mitzvah that begins at this point in time. Krishma, say your Krishma at night. Say your Krishma in the morning. You put your tefillin on in the.
Those are all Doraisa, so this is
correct.
The latest of Rabbah.
And all of the dinim d'Rabbanan that we have, for example, by Megillah, also fulfill all of the same rubrics. Megillah has to be at night time at this point in time, and during the daytime at this point in time. And if you gave your shalach manas at night, it doesn't count. You have to give it in the day. You have to make your suda in the day. There's mitzvahs of the daytime and mitzvahs of the night time.
When did they light the menorah on the base of Mikdash?
Both. They lit
Morning and night?
Yeah. It was near time. It had to be lit all the time.
When did
But the primary lighting was in the morning. The primary lighting was in the morning.
Oh, so that's why it's like maybe we should do menorah in the morning.
So, but the bizarreness of this whole thing, the bizarreness of the whole thing is the time zones are weird. And also, we have certain mitzvahs in the Torah, for example, that are mitzvahs on people. So, like, you have to put on tefillin. But your house needs a mezuzah. Right? Who has to put up the mezuzah in your house?
A Chabad rabbi.
Right. Who puts up the mezuzah in your house? You do.
Anyone.
You don't have to.
But who's the obligation for?
The obligation.
It's the obligation for you if it's my house.
Is there an obligation to put up a mezuzah on your house?
Or for the house to have
You
one.
have to have a mezuzah.
Okay.
Right? To have a mezuzah. There's no obligation. You make the bracha on putting it up because now you're fulfilling the obligation of having one there. So is Ner Chanukah a mitzvah on the person or on the house?
It's both. Yishuvesa.
Right? Ner Yishuvesa.
Right.
Which one? So now you have a whole world of machloksim, exactly.
Right.
And then you have a question, where do you light the menorah?
So is it the only mitzvah that has different levels? Like two does?
Sort of. I mean, the whole of Chanukah is a jumble. Like all of the halachas of Chanukah are like bizarre. They're all weirdnesses. There's a lot of weirdness about it. But aside from all of the halachic weirdness, and I mentioned this when I was speaking at the Yeshiva of South Florida, it's a crazy thing. Rishon Zalman Aruch in Halachah Shlema writes that there are not enough shirashim in the Gemaras and in Rishonim to answer many of these questions. Meaning, all of the Torah Baal Peh of Chanukah is still like very Baal Peh. It was never actually written anywhere. It still maintains its completely oral nature. There's like 2 blat in Maseches Shabbos, a couple of lines here and there in the Rishonim, and that's it. Like every Jew in the world knows about Chanukah, arguably the most observed mitzvah that the Jewish people have, certainly holidays that the Jewish people have. And bizarrely, it doesn't have like a thing to like, we know what it's based on, but like enough information to tease it out.
Its books weren't canonized.
Well, I
Yeah,
I was
the
just
stories
saying,
were not canonized.
well, also,
There's Maccabee 1, Maccabee 2, then there's all the weren't canonized.
Yeah.
And also the Rabbinic Judaism Pharisees were in contradiction to the Hasmonean dynasty, which was also in contradiction to the Sadducites or the Sadducees
Yes.
that controlled the temple.
100%.
And it was a revolution against the controlling of the temple. So it was a very sort of mixed, which is why I think they focused on the miracle more as opposed to the
and then there's also
battles
some,
because of
the Civil War.
There's some Jews that
politics and
right,
Yeah.
of all the holidays,
Yeah.
definitely not Purim. Right. Another reason not to be codified is that there's some Jews that never did celebrate Hanukkah. It's still to this day. The Ethiopian community only adopted Hanukkah when they came to Israel.
Well, so
Which
the Ethiopians
if
never had
you-
Hanukkah.
Right, they never had Hanukkah. So I'm saying it. And if you hold like Rav Yosef, like the Avad Yosef, they were Jewish the whole time also. So
100%.
I'm saying,
And
you
we
could
do.
be Hanukkah without. You could have.
I mean, they didn't have Talmud Bavli either.
Correct, but they did in Megillah.
Right, meaning because they were around from
Exactly.
the middle
Right.
era between the two. But Hanukkah was much later.
Correct.
They didn't even know about it.
No, so I'm saying it's maybe it's also just developed like what you
Yeah.
alluded to. It's all developed later, even into the 3rd and 4th century when the Talmud was put together.
100%. I mean, again, many of these things were maintained orally, and when Chazal reflected on the meaning of Hanukkah, what they chose was the Ner Hanukkah, and my argument is that on the surface, the Ner Hanukkah seems to be the least relevant part of the story. And then the question arises, why focus on any of it at all? I mean, why do we have Hanukkah? Why does this holiday exist?
It's the light of the
Correct.
It's literally
first
like
instituted it as a holiday.
We based them on the Chashmonaim.
They based them on the Chashmonaim, so they had a political interest in making it a holiday, right?
Right.
Because
For sure the Chashmonaim. And by the way, I'll make it a little bit more difficult for you. During the Second Temple period, we had a text called Megillas Tainus. Megillas Tainus was a proto-Tanaic piece of literature that detailed all of the days that it's forbidden to have fast days. All of those days were days of Second Temple importance. The day that they came back to Eretz Yisrael, that they re-established the second Beis HaMikdash, and the day that they reinstituted the Karbanos. And included in that, in Megillas Tainus, were Yom Tovim like Purim, which was the beginning of the return of the Jewish people to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash, and Hanukkah, when they restored their sovereignty from Greek control. And of all of the Yom Tovim that exist in Megillas Tainus, the only two that Chazal kept were Purim and Hanukkah. And for all of the political reasons that we mentioned, Hanukkah seems to have been something that should have been skipped. Right? Meaning Hanukkah should have been skipped. And even arguably, the Chachamim that survived the second Beis HaMikdash, who were not from the school of thought of the later day Chashmonaim, had good reason to say, we don't want to observe this. Because the thing that the Chashmonaim achieved, the Gemara says, anybody that says that they're from the base Chashmonaim is now an Eved. They've sold themselves out. They sold themselves out to the Romans. They no longer have any authenticity. They have no authority. They no longer have the yichus. They're done. The Chashmonaim are finished. The Ramban deals with this question at the end of Parashat Vayechi, where he asks the question, like, the Chashmonaim, how do they collapse? This is because they took monarchy and they retained it. They should not have retained it. They were excellent freedom fighters, but there's a big difference between being a revolutionary and running a government. They didn't know how to run a government, and they didn't give the control over to the people that should have, which was Shevet Yehuda. Because they said, we're the people that won freedom, so we're going to make that. Remember, that's this explicitly. The question is, why do we have Hanukkah? Why is this thing in existence at all? That is my question. And if you want to tell me that the miracle of the Ner, so this is what we began with, I think that the miracle of the Ner is irrelevant. It wasn't necessary. It was a very beautiful thing. Hashem, thank you so much. You did a nice thing for us. But it was unnecessary. How many people at the end of the day saw the miracle of the oil? A couple of Chashmonaim Kohanim, right? A couple of Maccabees in the temple, they saw this miracle. That was very nice. Yafeh me'od. Excellent. What did it do for everybody else? I don't know. Doesn't seem like it. And halachically unnecessary. They could have lit the menorah without it. All of this is to say that when the Gemara asks the question, "My Chanukah," I think it's an excellent question. Why are we doing this? Like, why is this a thing at all? And to that end, I had a thought. The miracle that we talk about, this miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days. I'm going to ask a technical question in the world of miracles. Do we know any other miracle like this in the Chumash or in Tanakh?
8 days.
Time, you're saying?
Meaning of this kind of miracle.
Like, the Mabba lasted 40 days.
Yeah, no, I'm saying a miracle where you have.
Day over day.
I'll give you a
Something
clue.
lasted longer than a show.
Yeah, I'll give you a clue. It's oil. Story of oil. So this is the Haftarah of Parshas Vayera. The Tanakh tells a story
Talk about Venezuela in there?
of Venezuela. Yeah,
Story of oil.
Alavai, right? So the Tanakh tells a story of Elisha. Elisha goes to a place called Shunem. There's Isha HaShunamis. And just like his Rebbe, there's a story of bringing a boy back to life. Here we go. But before the story of bringing the boy back to life, says the pasuk, this is in Malachim Beis in Perek Daled, that there's a woman that screams to Elisha. She says, "Avdachai Shimes, my husband, your servant, has died. And you know that my husband was a God-fearing Jew. And now the debt collector is coming. He's taking my 2 kids. He's coming to take my 2 children as slaves." Elisha says to her, "What should I do for you? Hagidili, tell me, what do you have at home?" And she says, "I have nothing at home. I just have a little jar of oil. And he says, go and get other kelim, other vessels from outside, from all of your neighbors. Empty vessels, as many as you can, don't hold back." And then he says, close the door, lock yourself in, you and your sons. And pour out from your little jar of oil into all of these kelim, and the rest you'll be able to sell. And she does this. And when all of the vessels were filled, miraculously, she says to her son, "Give me another kli, give me another vessel." He says, there aren't any more vessels. And the oil stops flowing. Psst. Amazing. We have a miracle just like this. Miracle of overflowing oil. There's oil, good. It's not enough. All of a sudden now there's more oil. There's more oil. Is that the miracle of Chanukah? It's option number 1 for the miracle of Chanukah. I'll tell you how the Beis Yosef was. This is a famous kasha of Beis Yosef. And this might be connected. Not sure. But the Beis Yosef asked the question, why do we celebrate 8 days of Chanukah? How much oil did they find? Enough for 1 day. So the miracle lasted for 7 days. How can we have 8 days of Chanukah? So this is known as the Beis Yosef's question. Beis Yosef in the Torah, Beis Yosef and Yosef Gara, author of the Shulchan Aruch, asked this question.
And there's
Somebody-
like 100 answers, right?
So somebody wrote a book of 100 answers to the Beis Yosef's question, and then somebody else wrote a follow-up 1,000 answers to the Beis Yosef's question. But my question is, what was the miracle? Was the miracle that the oil just increased? Was this a ribuy in shemen? It was an increase in... That was the miracle. Miracle was more oil. Or alternatively, there is another miracle described in Tanakh that functionally accomplishes the same thing. Totally different miracle. For this, you have to go all the way back to Sefer Shmos, to a story that you all know very well. What do you have in Sefer Shmos? Moshe Rabbeinu is out tending his flock, and then all of a sudden, he looks up and he sees a burning bush. Meaning you have a bush, and it's on fire. V'asneh einenu ukal. And the bush is not being consumed. Which miracle happened for Chanukah? Was this an increase in oil or a miraculous fire?
Can I?
Yeah.
Where is the story of the miracle of Hanukkah recorded? We don't have. If we don't, like, where's the textual basis?
It's in Maccabees.
Right, but that's not canonical.
I mean,
So we don't accept it as
we accept it
Torah.
we accept it as legitimate. It's not
not as
Tanakh.
divinely
Not divine.
inspired. So I'm saying, so we're not taking it word for word as we do in the Tanakh.
Yeah,
as
true.
being-
Yeah, I'm
as
saying.
being accepted.
So I'll tell you what the primary text.
gospel. Right?
I'll tell you what the primary text that we have from this is from that time period. We have the Megillas Tainis. That's from that time period.
Okay.
It details the miracle of
I
oil.
have to read into those.
And
Right.
and the Al Hanisim as well.
But
and-
this is written much later.
Al Hanisim, no. Al Hanisim the same time period. I'm checking that's like Dola and meaning.
I don't know.
I'm checking that's like
looked
Dola was
up
finished
yesterday,
at that
but
point in
when it
time.
was written, but I
Um,
could be wrong. I could be
So
wrong.
Megillas Tainis and Megillas Sofrim, which is Proto Tanakh as well.
Right.
The other text that we have of that time period is Haneris Halal.
I don't.
So-
I don't think that's written at the time. period.
That is written at the top.
Oh, okay.
That's meaning
I don't know.
within that century. It's written. That's those are the primary, very early texts that we have.
Right.
But aside from that, meaning this is
Right. So there is no canonical text.
correct.
So, right.
That's
So it's
exactly
all not considered divinely
Yeah.
inspired or divine.
right. Meaning this was all Divrei Chazal.
Right.
All Divrei Chazal. But my question is, this miracle that we are celebrating 8 days of, what kind of miracle was this? Was this the miracle of an increase in oil? Or was this a miracle of a different kind of fire? Miraculous fire, miraculous oil? No, what do you say?
Well, we've always talked about the oil.
We're talking about the oil, right? What do we say?
That's a good question.
It's a good question, right?
If I-
Burn down. They
Does it make a difference?
I think it does.
Why?
burn down.
Miraculously,
Yeah.
There's
well,
1,000 answers here.
There's 1,000
Probably
answers.
oil.
So I'll tell you. I think that this is one of the few primary machloksim that the Gemara discusses with regards to Chanukah. From a halachic perspective, the Gemara Masechah Shabbos, Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, asks the following question. And we won't go through the whole sugya now, but the Gemara wants to know. I'll read you the words. Ibailahu, they ask the question as follows. Hadlaka oisa mitzvah or hanacha oisa mitzvah? There's a famous sugya with regards to Hanukkah. What is the mitzvah? What is the mitzvah? And the Gemara gives two nafkaminas, two practical examples. The question is as follows. If you have a fellow that lights the menorah in the wrong location, doesn't put it by his window or by the front door, he lights it in his car, I don't know. Then he takes his lit menorah and he puts it in the right place. Has he fulfilled the mitzvah of Neres Chanukah?
There's two aspects to it, right? So the person may probably not a big mirror.
So this is the Gemara's question. Is the mitzvah in the placing of it, or is the mitzvah in the lighting of it?
I mean, at its core, when Jews have had times of travail, you don't have to be mefarsing the nis.
Correct.
So then, clearly, if you light it, you are Mekayim.
So I want to point out here that when the Gemara discusses this, the Gemara is not talking about the mitzvah of Pirsum HaNes at all. And arguably, that's not even the discussion here. Rashi might add it into the sugya. Practically speaking, when the Gemara is discussing this question of Hadlaka is a mitzvah, Hanacha is a mitzvah, it is simply the question of, is the mitzvah to put it there or to light it there?
It is to publicize it, right? So it should be to put it there.
So if it is about publicizing, so then it is about putting it there. What would the mitzvah of lighting there be?
Well, so two things we're doing, right? Just one is to make this glorious proclamation, and the other is to remember, that we're all of the Hashem, so we have to all have our own little internal. So I mean, there's always a duality to it, no matter what you do.
So how do we paskin? Halacha. What's the halacha? What does the Gemara conclude? Halacha is a mitzvah, hanacha is a mitzvah. Meaning, practically speaking, if you lit the menorah in your car, and then you put it on your windowsill, have you fulfilled the mitzvah?
Yeah.
No. No.
But if
No.
So then how do we explain it if you have a time when you're not supposed to publicize so Chazal actually do talk about this thing about right? That if it's a time of major danger, right? Like you could be shot. What happened in Australia?
Correct.
You do not have to publicize the mitzvah. You can do it in your house in like a
100%.
Correct.
Yeah. So for example, if you are, but that's assuming that you are in a house.
Correct.
Can you light it out in the field and bring and put it by your door, or put it on your table thereafter? No.
And what if you just left it in the field?
Then you haven't done anything, because it needs to be near issue base. It has to be at least connected to a house.
If you're not in your house, if you're
then you are not
obligated.
Then you are not obligated to the mitzvah.
Okay.
Do you need to put up a mezuzah in the field?
No.
No, there's nowhere to put it.
So if you're in a hotel, you don't have to light.
So that's your bias for the night. You have a bias.
So anywhere, and if you sleep in the field out in the
Then
open,
you don't have a bias.
Okay.
That's not a bias. You need to have some kind of structure.
And you sleep in your car. That's
So cause a shayla.
Does a sukkah count?
Maybe. Right?
Mixing the match.
What's interesting is we paskin, and this is how the Gemara concludes, that we conclude that hadlaka is a mitzvah. Now, I want to make the following claim. When we say that there is a miracle of more oil, if the miracle would have been a miracle of more oil, so then the job of the Jew in remembering this would be exactly like Elisha tells this woman. Take the oil and place it in such a way that it can increase in its bracha. Meaning what we are commemorating is that Hashem gave us bracha at a time that we didn't feel that there was much bracha going. That's the miracle that we are commemorating. That it's about the hanacha. Put it down, and you remember the fact that God showered blessings into the life of the Jewish people at a very dark time. If the miracle was an increase in the oil, then that would be the correct thing to do. But I think what the Gemara is telling us is that Hanacha is a mitzvah is not true. It's not about putting it there. It is about lighting. And in order to understand this, we need to understand there is a Gemara in Maseches Yoma, in the Chaf Aleph on the base, that says that there are 6 different kinds of fire. There's fire that consumes wet things, and fire that consumes dry things. There's fires of Gehenna. 6 different kinds of fire. And then there is 5 kinds of fire, and then there is a 6th kind, which is a fire that the Gemara calls Eish Ocheles Eish. A fire that consumes fire. Meaning it doesn't consume fuel, it consumes fire. And this, the Gemara says, is the Eish of the Shechina, the fire of the Shechina, which the Gemara at the end of Maseches Chagiga says, is how the Mizbech HaZahav, the golden Mizbech inside of the Kodesh section of the Beis HaMikdash, was never destroyed by the Ketores. Because the Kohen would light, and then Hashem's fire would come down and consume the fire of the Kohen. And then that which remained was Eish Ocheles Eish, was a fire that just consumes fire. It doesn't rely on other fuel. Now this we call miraculous. It is godly fire, heavenly fire. Eish Ocheles Eish. A fire that doesn't consume fuel, a fire that consumes fire. And my suggestion is that the fire that the miracle that we are commemorating here, is not a miraculous increase in oil, but that we drew down a fire that we hadn't seen for a very, very long time, and a fire that we are not going to see until the end of time. And this is the fire of Hashem, the Eish Ocheles Eish. And I want to explain what that fire is. What is Eish Ocheles Eish? Rabbi Nachman writes in Likutei Moharan in Torah Yud Daled. Talks about something fascinating. This is Rabbi Nachman's understanding of the American economy. Sounds bizarre, but I'll explain what I mean. There is. Let's get to L'chaim. Let me grab a tissue there for a second. There's a chiddush of the American economy that was the beginnings of capitalism. There was a novel idea, a brand new idea that nobody had ever thought of before, which is
No.
Come on,
I know how it ends. I don't know how it starts.
right. There's a novel idea, which is that it's possible to grow an economy. Meaning, you can grow an economy. Before American capitalism, the idea of growing an economy was unthinkable. Meaning everything was a zero-sum game. I have wheat, you have chickens. I will trade you some wheat for some chickens. But there's no way of me having more wheat and you having more chickens. Yeah, if the weathers and the gods and the whatever will deign it appropriate for me to have a little more wheat this year. But the economy as a whole doesn't grow. The economy is stagnant. And it's, if I win, you lose. All of a sudden comes along this idea of competitive capitalism, that you have the hand of the market, right? John Adams, the invisible hand of capitalism, of the market, that effectively what it does is everybody competes, and then acting in the best interest of yourself, you'll be able to push everything upwards, right? Everything can get better. Is there a limit to how big an economy can grow? It's a theoretical question, but it's an important philosophical question to ask. Theoretically speaking, is there a limit?
There's a consumption limit.
Meaning,
There's a consumption limit, and that's what it is.
meaning there's a limit to,
How much consumers can consume.
that's true,
So that's the limit.
but that's only within a particular category
Imports and exports, or is it a closed economy
of the world.
of the whole entire world?
Yeah.
There's a consumption on everything. I mean, there's only so many ships that humans could sustain to have, right? So there's anything consumption related. That's a very difficult
Yeah.
what that is, but
And resources are finite. I mean, they're not unlimited, so there is a cap.
The technology is infinite, and technology is a big part of that.
Right. In theory, could we?
I'm saying like you could have unlimited resources. You could have unlimited technology. You can't have unlimited consumption capacity. Like we can only consume so much that we can consume.
Well, at any point in time.
Correct.
But in another generation, we can grow it, we can expand it. Meaning,
Sure. But then the limit is the cap limit of consumption.
but
It's a market.
fine. But is there a fundamental limit
Yeah.
to the size of an economy? No. It's bizarre to think that way. But why is it that then, if that's true, why is it that economies go down? If in theory it's possible to have an ever-expanding economy. Right? Why do you have market crashes if in theory an economy could infinitely expand?
Things get ahead of themselves. I mean, it can't expand infinite. You know, it expands over time, but things can get ahead of themselves.
That's an important. So, Dr. Ben, what do you mean by it? Things get ahead of themselves.
You know, there's bubbles that form. People spend more than they're capable of at
Oh,
the time, and
so-
then have to backtrack.
So what happens
It's
is
usually speculation. It's usually not consumption related. It's usually speculation.
is people, right? Meaning,
But they're speculating on something of consumption, and then they're wrong, and that's
and then what ends up happening is because people are competing, they make assumptions and they make calculations that are based on their own best interest in order to beat the other guy. And sometimes they lose and the other guy loses, and then, right? So here's where Rabbi Nachman comes in. This is a fascinating mahalach that Rabbi Nachman has, where he writes as follows. This is in the Torah Lalos are covered, where we'll stand outside for a second. Ner Chanukah is a strange halacha. What's the official end time for Ner Chanukah?
How long it has to burn?
Yeah.
30, X amount of minutes after it says 30 minutes.
But what does the Gemara say? Mishadaka achama ad shetichle regel min hashuk. Until the feet have left the market. It's a bizarre phrase. What does it mean that the feet have left the market? So he says like this. In Torah Yud Dalet, paragraph Yud Beis, it says Zebuchinas mitzvahs Ner Chanukah. This is the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. L'hadlik samach lePesach habayis, the light close to the opening of the home. And then he explains, it has to go until Achot Tichle Regel Min Hashuk. Dahainu, Balei Lashon Hara v'Machlokes, Haholchim u'Meraglim u'Medablim u'Rechilas v'Lashon Hara, v'Osim Meribus u'Machlokes, Ben Onam l'Chavera v'En Ish le'Ishtay. The people walking in the marketplace are the people that are causing machlokes. They're fighting with each other, saying Lashon Hara about each other. They're tale-bearing, they're stirring things up. People that are like living for fights and controversies. And every Jew's obligation is to light a ner close to their home. וזהו עד שתיך לרגל מן השוק, שיזבטל בעלי לשון הרע ורכילוס, אשר רגל על לשונם וישרה והשלום בעולם. So the goal of Ner Chanukah is effectively to light a candle at every home, עד שתיך לרגל מן השוק, until all of the people that are still out competing go home. Meaning it's like Ner Chanukah acts as a siren call. Every Jew starts lighting their candles. And the goal of Ner Chanukah, this is the Chiddush of Rav Nachman, the goal of Ner Chanukah, you light it at the opening of your door, facing the marketplace, is to tell people, go home. That's why, until everybody goes home, you have to have a Ner Chanukah. Until nobody's left in the marketplace. Why? Because the marketplace is the place of competition. And he goes on to explain that there are two ways of growing an economy. The chiddush of the American Revolution and American capitalism was that you can grow an economy based on competition. But there is another way that nobody has tried yet. At least not large scale. And that is to grow an economy based on collaboration.
Well, every time countries try, the CIA intervenes.
Right.
I mean,
But in theory, if people didn't act with bad midos and would act in the best interest of themselves and others without underhandedness and without dishonesty, if everything would be out there, if everything would just be open and out there, and everybody would be as honest as they possibly can, and act with as much integrity as they possibly can, and acknowledge when they miscalculate things, instead of lying to their investors. Right.
not to go too far left, but China just executed someone who had investor fraud, whereas here you get 6 months of house arrest
Right.
At Otisville
at Otisville.
Right.
with a Daf Yomi shear.
Biggest stuff you have in the country, by the way.
Yeah.
Biggest stuff you have.
But China, that was a capital because you're taking from other people.
Right.
That was like the greatest offense that you could do.
Right. Which is, and only the government is allowed to steal from people
Yeah.
in China.
But the people
Right.
are the governments.
Uh-huh. Shkoyach. But what Rabbi Nachman is saying is, you know, like the science fiction, like versions of like alien societies where they all work perfectly collaboratively,
Yeah.
and they develop like massive, amazing technologies because they're not spending their time trying to like murder each other. They're actually working together. This, my dear sweet and holy friends, is called Eish Acheles Eish. It becomes a fire that consumes fire, meaning it's self-sustaining fire. It is an ever-growing economy of humanity. It is the possibility of there being a world where people come home from the marketplace and they engage in being at home, because that's the chiyuv. Is now you should basically go home, be with your family, cultivate a society, spend time with your wife and with your kids, and build a world that is yearning and dreaming of hoping of a time that people can come home. What does this have to do with the whole Chanukah story? Without going into all of the details of it, the primary thing that the Jewish people were up against, psychologically and theologically, at the time of the Greek invasion and all of the Hellenistic revolts, was the outdatedness and impotence of Torah. Meaning, for the very first time, Jews were faced with an adversary, with an enemy that was not barbaric as much as it was educated. No, not to say that they weren't bad people. They're plenty bad people. Greeks did terrible things. But their goal was education. Their goal was enlightenment. Their goal was art and science and history and sport. All the things that we think is good.
Well, to your point, Josephus was very clear that the Romans were way worse.
Much worse.
Right. So the Greeks were not considered.
Correct. I mean, once the Romans came, the Greeks were
Relative to other
100%.
empires, nobody would call them violent like the
100%.
like the Roman Empire.
The Greeks, for the very first time, we had fought Moabites and Ammonites, and we had fought Canaanites and Amalekites, and all of them were murderous pagan savages. All of a sudden, you meet these Greeks that have art and language and culture and sophistication. They have philosophy, and they have history, and they have drama, and they have music, and they have poetry, and they have language, and
Sport.
sport's the smallest piece of it,
No, I'm to your point.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying, and then you have a bunch of Jews that look around and say, once upon a time we were supposed to be something, and we haven't been that since the days of King Solomon. Since Shlomo Melech, we haven't been that. And the Persians have come and gone. They were barbaric. And the Medes were barbaric. The Babylonians, God help us all. But all of a sudden, these Greeks are cultured. And they're educated. And they're intelligent. And they're looking at us and saying, why is your version of the world better than ours? Why is your version better than ours? And that was a major shock to the system. And if not for the fact that the Greeks got provocative and they put an idol in the Beis Hamikdash, they kind of got a bunch of Hasmonean priests really angry. If not for that, there would never have been an uprising. There would never have been a revolt. The Jewish people would have slowly continued to Hellenize, as most of them had already. But all of a sudden, a bunch of Jews looked and they said, your arts and your language and your culture, but at the root of what you believe in, you don't believe in one God. You don't believe in a creator of heaven and earth. Which means that you deny the great purpose that the Jewish people came here to execute. And then the question is, are you, the Jewish people, ready, willing, interested in taking on the mantle of historic proportion, of being, of still maintaining that great vision that Avram Avinu had, of bringing the world to an understanding of ethical monotheism, of Oiseh Shalom Imrama V'Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow or another has the entire cosmos in creative, chaotic harmony, that this world will also be creative, chaotic harmony. Or do you still believe that the only way that you're going to be able to do this is by steamrolling every other culture and putting an idol in our sanctuary? Because at the base of that, at the base of your belief system, is still a denial of the objective of humanity as far as God told Abraham. Do we still believe in the big picture dream and vision of Klal Yisrael? Do we still yearn for it? Do we still want it? And in the midst of all of that, somehow or another, with uncanny capacity, they fought the battles, they won the wars. They suffered major casualties, by the way. There were 8 wars of the Maccabees. Take a look at the book of Maccabees. There were 8 wars. looks like a menorah. Yehuda Maccabee died after the fourth battle, meaning the beginning of the fifth battle. At the end of the fourth battle, they rededicated the Beis HaMikdash. That's Chanukah. But Yehuda Maccabee dies right after that. And his brother takes over from him, and his brother takes over from him. There's another three battles that are major battles that they fight against the Greeks until the whole thing is done. It wasn't simple. But in all of that, there was a miracle that occurred, which was, so to speak, away from behind the curtain, which was, you remember that great vision that the Jewish people has of Eish Chalas Eish, of a humanity that is chaotically but collaboratively in harmony with each other, growing the world not in competition but in collaboration, that something can be on fire and not destroy everything in its path. That's called Ner Chanukah. But that can only be if it comes from a source that's pure. It's not going to rest on something that's decrepit, that's morally decadent and decaying, as pretty as it might be. And so when Chazal looked back on the story of Chanukah, what they saw was not the eventual victory and the collapse of the Hasmonid dynasty. It was not the end of Greece and the takeover from Rome. What they saw is that for a moment, Hashem reached from behind the curtain and showed us that we are still those people, and that He's still helping us do that. And that's what Ner Chanukah is. It's not a miracle of the oil, it's a miracle of the Eish. Hadlaka is a mitzvah. Which means that when a Jew lights a Ner Chanukah, what you're trying to do is to bring people together off of the street, out of competition. And our hope and dream every time that we kindle a Ner Chanukah is that we should light a fire that only constructs and never destroys. That the fire of the Jewish people doesn't burn anything down, that it only builds. That's the dream of Chanukah. Which is why Pinchas Karetz writes, the letters around the dreidel are Nun, Gimel, Hey, Shin. It says the same Gematria Mashiach. That's why the minhag is to write those letters. It's Gematria Mashiach. Because Chanukah is a blast from the past yearning for that future. For that space-age society of perfect collaboration between people. Where fire doesn't have to destroy. Where an economy can grow infinitely with good midos without having to put somebody else out of business. Where people can explore their own truth without killing each other for it. Where people's personalities can shine without somebody bullying them. Meaning, the dream of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The dream of Matan Torah, of Moshe Rabbeinu, of David and Shlomo, that thing that we've been looking for and yearning for. The Chashmonaim, for a second, believed was once again possible, and Hashem said, that's what I want. I want a group of crazy Jews that look at the world and say, we could still make it better. And Hashem says, yeah, there's a fire that can build, that doesn't have to burn things down. Let me give a little bit of that to you. And that's why, my dear friends, we paskin hadlaka is a mitzvah. The mitzvah is to bring that fire. It's not about just putting the vessel there and saying, give me your blessings. It's about the Jewish people saying, we're going to light something. With the hope and prayer that it doesn't burn anything down. Chanukah. L'chaim.
All right.